Go for it. So hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar on our LGBTQ community's impact and its unrealized potential. So I'll let Eric Park, our StartOut New York Chapter lead, run the show for today.
Perfect. Thank you, Jessica. Like Jessica mentioned, I am the chapter lead for StartOut New York, and I'm incredibly grateful to be hosting today's event about StartOut's Pride Economic Impact Index, and particularly how we can work as a community to show the index, understand a bit more about the economic impact of our community, and we'll also have a Q&A and discussion towards the end. And so we'll start off with a brief introduction. We'll have a demo of the index to learn a little bit more about how it's working, and then a discussion with the publishers. So before we kick it off, I'd love to introduce you to Dominic Gadori, who is Senior Director of Product Management at ADP Ventures, our sponsor for today's event. So Dominic, I can hand it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Eric, and hello, everybody. ADP is very excited to be sponsoring this event. Our Pride board met yesterday, and actually I was able to give them kind of a 1-minute walkthrough of the StartOut Pride Economic Impact Index. And I have to tell you, they were all super excited. As a company that is very data-centric, and a lot of the folks who are part of the board understand that data is really what drives a lot of the value that ADP brings to the table for our clients and to our employees. They definitely see the tremendous value that's here. So you can see here in this slide, just to give you kind of a high level of why data is so important to us. Essentially, the most important one here is that ADP pays 1 out of every 6 Americans, and we move more than $2 trillion a year. In fact, we are the biggest movement of data provider that sends data through the IRS every year. So it's a pretty large set of data that we provide. If you go to the next slide, you can see here that one of the unique aspects of the data that we have is it's all based on location, and because of that, we're able to provide services and information and analytics around things like COVID. So recently, we've been helping our clients with understanding things like the payroll tax deferral program that's as a result of COVID. We've also been able to help the healthcare industry with the changes of where people are located, specifically nurses and other healthcare related folks. As you probably have experienced in your own locations, the movement of nurses and doctors and so forth as COVID has risen and come down has been really it's been a big impact. And so having the statistics around who is where has been really helpful. And then finally, on the last slide here, just some of the analytics you can see here that we're taking a look at in terms of where are people, where are the different types of talent, where are people working in different industries. And I'm proud to report that ADP last year introduced self-ID, LGBTQ self-ID in all of its HR systems. And so now we're going to be able to also slice into where the LGBTQ community is impacting companies all over the country. So, bottom line is I see tons of synergies here, and I'm very excited to learn more as a part of this. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Dominic. And I can't say how happy I am whenever I see the ADP logo. They were my first paycheck starting off as a queer man working in the tech industry as well. So now I want to hand it off to our stellar panelists. We have 2 with us today. And so do you want to start off with an introduction of yourself?
Sure, happy to. Hi, everyone. And thank you, Dominic, and thank you, Eric, for organizing this event. It's awesome. I'm Wydler. I'm the Executive Director of StartOut. Been doing this for 5 years. Love it. It's amazing that all the amazing people in our midst. So inspiring to see all of you do what you're doing every single day to advance the cause. Our mission remains to increase the diversity, the number, and the impact of our LGBTQ entrepreneurs and then amplify their stories to drive the economic empowerment. So while fundamentally we're not a research company, quite to the contrary, we're actually hands-on support of early stage and growth stage LGBTQ entrepreneurs. We're excited to have partnered with Socos, with Vivienne Ming, of course, Dr. Vivienne Ming and her team, who, by the way, have done this project pro bono. So anyway, briefly, that's to myself. Vivienne, you're on.
Okay. So, hi, everybody. If you've never met me before, I'm Vivienne Ming. I know the face doesn't sell the last name, but hey, it's a complicated world nowadays. So I used to be the chair of StartOut. Now I'm fancy smancy title. I'm the chair emeritus and I think also vice chair at the same time, which makes it feel like a bit of a puppet government, very Putin-esque, but I'm not pulling the strings behind the scenes. Instead, I used to be an entrepreneur like many of you. I started, in fact, I just started my 6th company. We're filing our incorporation papers right now because I'm dumb. I keep falling for the same trick. I want to run a science experiment and I keep realizing, you know who would be stupid enough to fund my science experiments? Venture capitalists, because they keep falling for the same scam. As long as I pay them back, they keep funding my experiments. Well, every now and then those experiments are not really fundable. They're not really a company. And I still want to be able to do things for free. So we run this philanthropic lab called Socos Labs. People bring us problems that, small things like epilepsy, diabetes, bipolar disorder. Our company can't retain Black women. Our country doesn't know what to do about LGBT inclusion. And if I think my team can make a meaningful difference, then I pay for everything. We go in and we try and come up with a solution. And if we do, we give it all away. Turns out revenue is a core part of having a successful startup, which I may have missed in putting together Socos Labs. But when we get to turn out projects like this one and really show in a real-time sense the impact of people that are just a little bit different than what the nightly news would make you think an entrepreneur looks like, then it makes it all worthwhile. And my life is pretty good. I'm happy to spend my money this way. So what are we up to next? Is it a demo? Should I
believe we head into the demo, yeah.
All right, we can get right to it. Now, I tend to get a little loopy in these things, so it seems that they've given me a script to keep me on track, which is genuinely not a bad idea. I'll take it out on them diva style later. But let's look at what we've got. So right now on my screen, I'm only seeing the title of this thing, so I don't know how it's working for anyone else. So let's just make certain that the actual view is well-centered for everyone. If it is, if I see a couple heads nodding that it looks good to them, then I will say we've landed right here on the index. What the hell is it? What this is a chance for us to look at what Andreas said StartOut is all about. The impact, the diversity, and the numbers of LGBT founders in all the major metros in the United States. So right now you should be seeing a map. It's got a bunch of bubbles. It's got like a weird measles thing, except some of them are green, which is really gross. Well, those are the big green ones are the good kind of measles, I guess we can say, like the good kind of cholesterol. What we're looking at, every one of those bubbles, if you haven't figured it out, is a major metro in the United States. I believe there are 94 represented there right now. And the size is the scale here in terms of the mean LGBT experience. So the average gay, lesbian, transgender entrepreneur in San Francisco, in Boston, you can see these big balloons. On average, funding rates, job creation, patent creation, very high in these cities. But you might see something more interesting, which is, wow, Pittsburgh, of all places, is even bigger than Boston and San Francisco. Well, you may also note it's only 2 people. So this is the means, the average experience for an LGBTQ founder in these cities. And, you know, there's some immediate things that we can take away, but we're going to be able to dive into the details of these cities. That's probably a good idea, in some detail. So right now we're just looking broad strokes. And I think you see some things that might be a little bit surprising. Yes, San Francisco, New York, Boston seem to be doing well, but you can see a lot of other cities there where there have been successful entrepreneurs that are really present in creating a better life for their fellow citizens of those cities. And, you know, it's fascinating to be able to see this and understand. So again, the size is the absolute scale of the average experience for an LGBT entrepreneur. And then the color is what we call the achievement gap. It is the difference between that mean achievement and what we truly believe is possible. Now, truly believe is possible, we could just imagine everybody's equally successful at all things. We wanted to do something that was much more rational and a little nerdier. We wanted to build a model. And that model said, if we look at the best performers, the top quintile of performing cities, and we could translate, we could say, well, what if everyone could do as well as the best 3 cities, which here, Boston and San Francisco are amongst those. What if we translated that? Scaled for the size of the local entrepreneurial economy, scaled for the presence of universities and so forth. And you can see there are some cities like Dallas. That's a big city that could be having a big impact, and it's not. There are relatively few out entrepreneurs there, and we think there's a huge potential, which is not being tapped. So right now, to summarize, you see the map, you see all of these major metros on the map where queer people are successfully creating companies, but also those places where we think there's potential that has not yet been achieved. And I think we're just jumping over to totals now. So we've been looking at the mean experience, the average experience. If we switch over to totals, you'll see a pretty significant change. It's maybe not super surprising, but San Francisco dominates. Not only is the average experience for a queer entrepreneur better in San Francisco, but sheer numbers drive it up. It is not quite, but it is, I think, very close to being the driver of aggregate entrepreneurial output in the United States. So you can see there's 170 out LGBT entrepreneurs in San Francisco. I should take a moment and point this out. When I say entrepreneur, what am I talking about? The value of people starting a mom and pop shop on Main Street is powerful, but I'm talking to the StartOut crew here. All of us are envisioning high growth entrepreneurship. We're going to create a company that's going to change. We're going to be the next ADP. Surely not in their space, but you know, Uber for ADP. I don't know what that is, but you will. Blockchain for ADP. There you go. We're going to figure these things out. We're going to make that next huge change. That's what we wanted to look at. And if I need to put it in blunt terms, looking at queer entrepreneurs in high growth entrepreneurship is a bit of a canary in a coal mine. When we look at cities and we see that there's a problem, you know it's not just us. You know that this generalizes to something even bigger. But we don't need to dwell here. We can see, again, the scale is the total aggregate job creation, patent creation, funding and exits. San Francisco leads, and the colors, how close we're getting. We do have a little bar chart here that gives you some deep dive. Right now, it's showing you numbers for the entire United States. I really love, if you look up at the top, just above those bar charts, San Francisco could have created 900,000 additional jobs over the last 20 years, as it turns out, had LGBT entrepreneurs there had the same opportunities as some of the best performing cities. Even San Francisco is imperfect, and you can see it on those bar charts. In blue, you see two numbers. In dark blue is our actual counts. These are people that have voluntarily outed themselves and allowed themselves to be counts. Then we have a strong statistical model that gives us some further insights. And you can see that even those two numbers, even that light blue statistical model is way below purple. Purple is our achievable. If we look at funding rates in other cities, maybe surprising to some of you, but San Francisco is underperforming. We really believe that San Francisco could have higher achievable. And that's not a trivial number, right? That's 36 billion. I think our difference from the light blue, which is about 20, is $16 billion on the table that didn't get collected and should have been. Extra growth, extra discovery that could have been part, not just of our community, but we could have given to the entire city. So I'm going to follow the map here. We've covered the map, the bubbles, the totals, the means, and hopefully you've at least gotten a bit of a flavor of what I'm talking about with the achievables, this counterfactual world in which each of you had the chance to build the best possible company without the pitfalls of not having access to capital, with challenges in finding, the best possible starting team, which is one of the most important predictive elements for any successful startup. There are still barriers out there, and we're able to measure them in real time. So I'm going to throw out some questions here. I want everyone else to come in with questions. I think Zoom lets us drop them in as we go. So if anyone wants to dive into anything, we can absolutely do that. But I see one question right away, which is San Francisco is doing really well, but New York isn't. So what's going on? That's actually really interesting, because if you clicked on both of them, you'd see something kind of fascinating, which is the number of queer entrepreneurs in both cities is about the same percentage of the total entrepreneurial community. So in other words, San Francisco and New York, while the queer entrepreneurship rates look a little bit lower, genuinely lower than the general population rates, it is, it's pretty equitably represented. Yet when you look at those bar charts, funding rates in New York, job creation in New York, this is one thing. It may seem a little perverse, but turns out New York is a much better metro for job creation by entrepreneurs than San Francisco is, but not for queer entrepreneurs. So understanding what drives that. And I'm going to be really blunt. We're probably going to get into this a little bit later, talking about industry in general. But one preview when we look at that data visualization is when you go in and pitch a VC, are they looking at you as a game man and thinking, why is this guy pitching me a semiconductor startup? Why aren't they pitching a lifestyle company? And we see that genuinely in our data. So we really think New York has a lot to grow into. That's positive at the same time that's negative. There's something clear for for New York to lean into. And then we have some other cities. I'll just pick on one, Boston, that, really what I think we're looking at there is we're undercounting. We know that there's more people out there, but many cities, people are still feeling closeted. It may seem surprising that Boston is one of them. It's a StartOut Chapter city. It's a very progressive city, and yet people's willingness to be open is still challenged. I think there's still a sense of, if I'm starting my MIT-based startup, am I really going to be taken seriously if I tell them that I've got a husband, or in my case, a wife? So these are some real challenges that are still in front of us. And I think San Francisco, even San Francisco, can do better. All right, where are we going next? Jobs totals in New York. So we're on New York already. That's terrific. So you can see that, can you call up are you going to hover over the jobs? Either way works. Gosh, we see that 10,000 total jobs created over the most recent time period by queer entrepreneurs. And I was really focusing on this. It's amazing that that's where the script writers wanted me to go, because when you look at that number in the menu, the hover menu you're seeing on the right, 10,000 created jobs, we actually estimate 338,000 jobs should have been created over the last 20 years. This is just a huge impact that we believe benefits everyone, right? When you create a job, that job doesn't just go to, our queer best friends. We don't just get on, what is the gay one? It's not Tinder. It doesn't matter. We don't swipe right looking for your next hire, right? This is everybody in your whole community. When those jobs don't get created, everyone in New York suffers. Which is obviously the story that everybody needs to understand. And it's not just LGBTQ, but we might have a chance to get to that later. So let's, New York funding, sure. I see that high gap difference between actual funding and estimated. So again, actuals, we go through and we get volunteers. Some of these are StartOut members like yourselves. And if you have not yet actively participated in adding data to this project, please, we're not going to make you, but participate, answer questionnaires. There's a lot of people that are involved in StartOut that are maybe not active members. Get yourself known. This data, we don't share it at an individual level with anyone. So we're not going to share your personal details. It's just so that people understand. Now, what we're able to do, though, is take that data. This is purely for the nerds out there. We take that data and we apply an MCMC algorithm. So this is a statistical machine learning model that allows us to essentially infer all of those hidden people, all of those founders that are probably actually there. They actually created a job. They actually secured some funding. And, there's a big difference here, as you can see, between those very narrow dark blue lines and our predictions of actual funding. And when you look at our statistical estimate, you can see, for example, for funding, $6.6 billion. That's a huge amount of secured funding for queer entrepreneurs. And yet, to most people's minds, we're kind of invisible in this process. And when I say we, I mean, as someone who's transgendered and co-founded a company with my wife, there aren't that many of us out there. This isn't really statistics anymore. This is just, I can give you our business cards. So being present, being counted really matters. The fact that I've been able to contribute 6 companies to this data set is something that I'm proud of. But you can see here, there's still so much to do. So much countable data turned into statistics, turned into achievables. So I'm going to take a tiny break. I don't know whether any questions have come through, if any of the hosts want to throw them at me, but it's always good to just relax for a moment, give everyone a chance to get a sense of what's going on. And then I'm going to launch into LA next.
Sure, and I think that was a really good point. I was going to ask the New York question just because I'm a little bit biased coming from San Francisco, and now that I'm in New York. I think a follow-up question that I've heard is, if I'm an entrepreneur, how should I really leverage all of this data to make sure that I know the pitfalls moving forward, whether that's maybe specific funding opportunities that won't look at me a little bit oddly because I'm pitching semiconductors or anything like that. So I think that would be my question here.
Yeah, so we're gonna have a chance, for example, to look at the industry fingerprint here in a moment, and it will give you some, we can get into that in just a little bit. But, one thing is, this is an evolving tool. It's out there, it's open, it's free for people to use, and it's not solely targeted at the entrepreneurs themselves. Though I will answer your question about making use of this. You know, part of this was simply because StartOut hosted an event with Congress, and the #1 request we got from the LGBT caucus was, we need more data. You know, we want to help you guys, but we need to be able to support our arguments. We got the same sort of requests from banks. Now, I know that they're not the typical funders in startup land, but somewhere along the world, you are working with the traditional finance industry. And, you know, knowing that those big banks were actually running programs, targeted programs, to help non-traditional entrepreneurs become successful, rather than making broad assumptions. So, you know, we wanted to make a tool that could do a lot of work, would allow journalists to explore questions of what are there still barriers. You know, there's this illusion that if you're a gay man, you're probably wealthier than the average American, when the truth is homelessness rates and poverty rates are actually higher in the queer population. Now, we can be honest, that's probably not most of our stories, but I've been there. And so understanding that it's a different space isn't just something for the entrepreneurs themselves, it's for the entire ecosystem. What we wanted to say is, I'm a member of a city. I am the mayor of Indianapolis. And I know, whatever my political leanings, that there are some amazing queer people in my city that are creating positive change. What can I do to help? I want those jobs. I want those patents. And I care about them a lot more than I care about who you're cohabiting with. You know, how do we make an argument to everyone that this is valuable? But let me do LA, and then we'll jump into the fingerprint and maybe some of these other visualizations super quickly, so that you can get a sense of some of the different ways you can look at this as an entrepreneur yourself. So here's LA. I think it's been selected, and you see LA's a giant city, second biggest city in the US, this progressive coastal haven, and yet, boy, is it really dogging it in our index. You know, the aggregate output for LGBTQ entrepreneurs is relatively low, and it is so below our estimate of its potential. We see so much more for it to be doing. And one way of looking at that, if we click on the industry fingerprint here, maybe we can get a little bit of insight. You know, this is actually interesting. Yeah, that'd probably help a little bit. You know, LA's an industry town. A lot of cities are. It's interesting that the second largest city in the US is such an industry town, but here you can see, what you're seeing is what my team internally calls the industry petri dish. So the size of each of these polygons is how big that industry is in the startup ecosystem of that city. So I'm not just saying the entertainment industry is big in LA. We all know that. It's big for entrepreneurs in LA. It's a single biggest factor. But despite it being an industry town, LA's got a lot of other things going on. You know, it's got a lot of banking. You can see a lot of industries in there in red. These are negative predictors, industries where our predictions about LGBTQ representation, the actual numbers are way below our predictions. So banking is a tough industry for queer founders. And LA has a significant financial industry in it. There's another reason why LA is bad, and we can get at it by jumping, and we may tie up here just so that we can leave more time for questions. But if we go to, I think maybe it's charts. So we got a whole bunch of different visualizations and go from funding to the entrepreneurship rates. So down, sorry, it's just above the y-axis of the chart. There you go. Click on that. Go to entrepreneurs per 100K. Sure, let's try that one. And you see, for example, Los Angeles is way below San Francisco. So for 100,000 people living in the LA basin, there's only, 0.2 queer entrepreneurs. We actually think that number could be much higher. And that's part of the reason LA is kind of struggling as a metro region to achieve its potential. But we've got all sorts of different visualizations. Now I'm not going to explain them, but just jump over to the plots and you can see that you can restructure the data in different ways, throw up different variables to see what's going on, how your city compares to other cities. And here's one thing. I'm going to close with this. If you can just leave it on the initial ones, and there's two little buttons on there that say log scale. That one, yeah, hit that, and then hit the one down below. Here's something kind of interesting. Do log scale and then do median. Go back to the means, not the median. So what's interesting is, yeah, richer, bigger cities tend to do a little bit better for queer entrepreneurs. But there isn't a huge relationship. And entrepreneurs aren't our only population. If you click on female, you'll see we can then break down the same information just for female entrepreneurs, not just lesbians, all of them. And you see, again, truly little tiny cities, poor metros, some surprising startouts. I think one of our top cities on average for women is Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Minneapolis and Phoenix are real standouts for female entrepreneurs. Then we'll just close up here and you can click on all and you can see now it's all entrepreneurs, not just queer, not just women. And suddenly you see, with a couple of outliers, a real relationship between the wealth and size in the city and the success of the local entrepreneurial community. Why is it that when we look at queer entrepreneurs, that relationship goes away? Again, that's just for the geeks and the scientists out there, but there's some really interesting data in here. And if you want to know as an entrepreneur, how do I make use of this? Understand some really immediate things that we see in this. If you are a female entrepreneur, your funding rates out of Sacramento are 30% higher than San Francisco, which you could hit with a really good Frisbee toss. Success in neighboring metros is really, go to any of these ones and you can see some really interesting things. Get out of LA, go down to San Diego, get into new industries. AI and biotech are often very inviting, whereas older, more hierarchical industries are less inclusive of people that are different. So here, I think if we're looking at women, we see, really differentiated. Get into AI. Look at that. It's really overrepresented for queer founders. It's a great industry to go into. So, if you're really looking for the place to make your impact, this can help you sort of sculpt your identity and your pitch of the company that you're looking at. But another way to flip it around, and here I really will be quiet, is, if we're a group like StartOut and we want to break a bad habit, look at Austin. Austin is a pretty good city. I think in everyone's mind for inclusion, right? That's what everyone tells me. I love visits to Austin. It's not like the rest of Texas, they tell me. And yet we can clearly see that queer entrepreneurs in Austin could be doing better. They could be more opportunities. So what can the local StartOut chapter do? And one thing maybe is don't bust your head against breaking into a bad industry that's just simply not inclusive. What if we look for industries where we already have traction and really try and build up a community there, link people together that are trying to create something new? So it gives a whole bunch of different looks at what you can do. And we're going in all new places. We're in talks about expanding throughout the Americas. We're working actively right now at Socos Labs on intersectionality, looking at Black entrepreneurship, at Mexican, Cuban, Puerto Rican entrepreneurship throughout the US and throughout the Americas, like knowing these fine details, and then finally getting into what works. What are the programs that truly make change? That's our next big mission to roll into this. Again, just for the nerds, we're looking at causality, building some econometrics into here that really give us a sense of which of StartOut's programs are making a difference, which of the local economic development programs are really making a difference. Do entrepreneurs actually care about tax breaks? Or do we care about gaining access to high quality talent? Well, we can already begin to see the answers right here in the index. So thanks for giving me a little bit of time, but I have chatted for a long time. I'd be happy to answer questions. I'm sure the rest of the hosts would love to pitch in as well.
Sure, and I'm happy to put in a quick note before we go into the Q&A. We would obviously love to get feedback on the index. So afterwards, we'll send you a quick note through the Eventbrite. So if you just take a brief moment and fill that out, we'd love to incorporate feedback in future versions and just understand how this tool might be useful for you as well. But now I know we have a little bit of time, and so we want to make sure that this is interactive as well. And I know that there were a few questions flowing in through the chat already. I think there's one for Abby here, which is, can we track time trends since data collected since 2000 and updated monthly?
Yeah, so the data is collected. We did arbitrarily start in 2000. It gets collected monthly. Needless to say, the last few months have been very weird. And if you watch it in real time, monthly, as the data overturns, you do see some substantial changes. I mean, I think we've probably added 10 cities to this system since we launched, just because suddenly, that's our threshold, 50 funded entrepreneurs in the local entrepreneurial community. And some cities I bet none of you would have thought would have been on there are there. So that's our threshold, and we see this stuff come in. Yes, we are actively working on putting a time slider into this, so you can see trends, you can watch this stuff develop over time. I think we've generally seen, particularly in the means, a real diversification over the last 10 years in particular. It's not a lessening of the impact of San Francisco, but a rising of the impact of many other cities. Seeing Nashville as a strong city. It's not so great for women and LGBT entrepreneurs, but just as an entrepreneurial hub, right in the heart of the sort of southeastern sector of the United States. In fact, Tennessee in general has 4 cities that pass threshold. Tennessee and North Carolina make this little belt that have more cities above threshold than all of the states around them. It's really sort of interesting. What did they figure out about how to create such successful local populations? And Knoxville becomes an interesting case. Knoxville was not on our map at all, and now for women, it's the best in the region. And understanding, not only seeing that change, so you can see the trajectory. If you're a VC and you're watching, what are the up and coming cities? Where should I be looking for new exciting people and trends? But also, of course, for us doing the statistical analysis, what works? What is causally driving these outcomes? Because we get to see them. So yes, sorry, that's a very long-winded way of saying from day one, we knew we were going to want to do time-varying information. If anyone wants to throw in on the questionnaire, how best that could be visualized. Oh my goodness, there's so many ways. Some of you might be design nerds and you really think, maybe someone wants to play with that time slider and see the stuff change in real time. Maybe just be really clear, just put up charts that show those changes, time against the variable of interest and you can select the cities you want to look at. That data, it's there. We've got it. We can actually analyze some of this by hand when we really need to get into something. For example, the chief economist of New Jersey called us up and said of the New Jersey Economic Development Office, and said he really would love to know. They've actually been wanting to run a program on LGBTQ entrepreneurs, but they couldn't get any data. Could we help them out? We didn't share any personally identifiable data, but we were able to aggregate every question they had a specific, every answer they had a specific question to and offer it. Because you may notice an unfortunate thing, if any of you happen to be, I know you're really from New York, but let's just say for rent reasons, you might be residing somewhere in the Jersey region. None of New Jersey's metros are represented on our map. And that's because they're all part of the greater metro regions of other cities, Philadelphia, New York, and so on. And so they've all kind of gotten captured. But it turns out that New York, if you treated it as a metro in itself, it's right up there. New Jersey, I mean, it's doing pretty well. So we're able to do this hand. We had the Royal Bank of Canada give us the same question. They've been trying to understand discrimination in Canada, and they didn't have any good measures. They really wanted to understand queer in particular. And so we said, hey, we'll run this. In fact, we found there were 10 metros in Canada that were above threshold. Some of them obvious, like Vancouver and Toronto, but there were a number of smaller ones, Calgary and Edmonton, for example, that were really healthy for women and weird things. French-speaking regions just had half as many female entrepreneurs as the English-speaking regions in Canada. So stuff like that begins to pop out of our data. I know we still have work in front of us to be able to turn that into something everyone else can leverage, but it's there. And the richer the data set we can get from everyone, and the more requests we can get, so we can see, what is the missing tool that's going to make the biggest difference for the decisions I make, we can then throw those onto the index.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Vivienne. I know we have one more question here in the chat. So it seems like there's a comment regarding the opportunity for LGBTQA+ entrepreneurs to enter less established emerging industries such as AI, biotech, like you mentioned. How can success for our community in new industries spill over to improve opportunities in other more traditional industries for LGBTQA+ entrepreneurs? I really love that question, and I think it's very interesting.
I think it's great. And I actually want to hand this over to Andreas after I arrogantly add in my fill. So I get the chance to analyze a lot of data outside of the specific index. And one of the things that I think gets underreported is that the single biggest driver of reduction in bias, particularly in the workplace, isn't anti-bias training, it's not empathy training, it's not, unfortunately, a lot of the workshops that I'm sure many of our organizations run, as well-intentioned as they are. The single biggest driver of decreases in bias goes by this very wonky title of counter-stereotypical exemplars, which boils down to spending time with people that violate your stereotypes. Now, one industry might be challenging to break into. And again, we see this really clearly with women. I believe that it's true with LGBTQ entrepreneurs. Highly old school, hierarchical industries like banking formally, interesting, like entertainment informally, are very hard for people to break into. A small number of people make all the decisions. It can be hard if they have stereotypes about success to break in. These new industries are open. One of the things that I suspect is true, but I'm freely offering, it's just speculation. I happen to be a genius that's always right about everything, but take it as you will, is that I think if we can break through and just violate the idea of what a founder is. I admire the CEO of Apple, but he spent a lot of time not acknowledging to anyone who he was until Apple was pretty much a monopoly. And so having someone maybe not just, this is something we actually see in the research, that it isn't just strictly your gender, but aspects of femininity and masculinity that you display that influences funding rates and what VCs think about you. This is replicated research. So if you could break those stereotypes, this is going off topic, but then I will hand off to Andreas. When I was an academic at Stanford and I told the head of my institute that I was transitioning, he told me that I'd lost my edge. In the years since, I've only founded 6 companies. But in his mind, I'd lost my edge because I wasn't a jerk anymore, to put it bluntly. And, he had this stereotype that for me to be a Stanford level professor, I had to be crazy aggressive. Turns out I've done so many more high impact, good things since I've been me. So this is one way that I think breaking through in more inclusive industries can actually spill out and just change people's idea about entrepreneurship in general. For that matter, let me just say, I don't think anyone's growing up dreaming of being Jamie Dimon, whatever you might think of him. They grow up dreaming of being Elon Musk or maybe Megan Smith, and that's what they're trying to replicate. So being part of those really sexy cutting edge industries are also it's more impactful role modeling. All right, I promise I'll shut up.
I know we're running out of time, so let me just say one thing. It was an excellent question. You obviously don't change your dream and your industry and your idea just because there's a red dot instead of a green dot, right? What it could mean is that if you're willing to relocate, you might find a more welcoming environment somewhere else. Or if you're willing to not relocate, but add additional staff, or so, you might find it in a cluster in the industry, and you might not have all LGBTQ staff anyway. So this is a tool to document, illustrate, show insights, but this is not a tool to tell you what to do. If you're from an investor perspective, you can see it cynically and say, great, it's a terrible city so I can get a much better deal. I can squeeze those entrepreneurs. We could have fewer opportunities. It's a terrible viewpoint, but you can take it. Or you can say, no, it's just like, I'm not going to go there because there's just not enough opportunities as an investor. So there's always 2 sides to the coin. And as I don't have much to add to Vivienne's comments other than, this is just a tool, a very powerful tool, and incredible insights, but this does not mean that you have to totally change what you're doing. It simply means you might want to consider some alternatives based on the data there. That could be trying harder to find other investors, trying harder to have a virtual office, whatever that might be, that informs you. But you obviously don't change the dream you have just because of the data.
I agree with Andres, obviously, entirely. But let me actually add, something I learned very early on with my first startup, and is just carried through every time, is know who you're pitching. Before you ever walk in the door, you should never walk out and think, God, I really wasted my time. That guy didn't get us at all. Then you made a mistake. Control the things you can control. One of the things you can control is if someone's not going to get you, don't bother. So I will say, if you know that you've got a great idea for a banking startup, and you can see that that's a tough industry to break through in, then you can use this to know you really need to do your homework. Find the right firms, find the right support staff. It's going to be harder. If that's your passion, have open eyes about it. Being a realist is sometimes it sucks, but it's that chance. Because I will tell you, that first time you break through, or maybe the second, I don't know, but somewhere in there, they start calling you. Once you have that chance to demonstrate that whatever their stereotype of you was, you are so much more than that, then doors truly begin to open. And sometimes that means the worst tragedy here is all the people that unfortunately are not in our numbers yet. I want them to be, but they're not yet. It's all the people that had the dream, but never got to the stage that they even appear in our data. They never got that first round of funding. They never had the opportunity for a significant angel investment. So they never surfaced enough in the data for us to recognize them. We need to understand that part of the journey as well. And we're working on that. But the realistic aspect of that is sometimes the world is stacked against you, and you've got to be smart in the choices you make and where you find that talent. And I agree with Andres, where you locate, find a city that's going to be your home. And let me tell you, don't just default to assuming it's going to be San Francisco. There really are good alternative cities out there that have the talent and the access to capital that you need. Also, I'm trying to buy a house, so I don't need you competing with my overheated housing market.
That's a good point. Vivienne, tell us where you want to buy a house, and we can all kind of go to the cities all around it and check the index as well.
Yes.
Well, perfect. I think with that, I will close this out. I want to thank Vivienne and thank Andres again for your time today and being so flexible and sharing so much insight. I think understanding this data is really the first component of being informed, especially about funding and where we can provide more impact within the LGBT community. I also want to, of course, thank you for attending, everyone on the call. Your attendance is really a testimonial of the importance of diversity and inclusion in the entrepreneurship ecosystem. Thank you again for all of your support and engagement. And of course, I want to say thank you to Dominic and ADP for the support on this event. And with that, I can hand it over to Jessica. I think there's one more comment here that's left.
Share for our StartOut community that our next event that's coming up, so the Equity Summit. Hope that you can make it. And again, thank you so much for all the participants on our event today and our attendees.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, everyone.